Mandalorian Season 3 Episode 2 is finally here, and we need to break it down, so let's get straight into it. We opened the episode over Tatooine on Mos Eisley, and it looks like celebrations and festivity are underway. We see a few Landspeeders racing through the streets, which happen to look very similar to Luke's X-34 Landspeeder. We also see fireworks, and on the side, a lone speeder doing donuts. We then cut to Peli Motto talking to a Rodian who needs his ride fixed, and as the two negotiate over terms, we can see a BD unit in the background, the same type of droid as BD-1 from Fallen Order. Peli then mentions,
"Should charge you more, considering now I gotta work Boonta Eve."
And Boonta Eve is actually a very old celebration that can be traced back to the days of the Old Republic, celebrating the Hutt Boonta Hestelic Shad'ruu's rise to godhood. It then turns out that the Rodian's problems were actually concocted by Peli Motto and the Jawas. Putting it simply, the Jawas take apart unsuspecting speeders, whose owners are then forced to hire Peli Motto for repairs, and the two parties take a cut from the profits. So it's almost as if Peli Motto was in bed with the Jawas. Oh wait.
Dated a Jawa for a while. They're quite furry. Very furry.
Mando arrives and Peli jokingly asks him if the Hutts are back or if they're here to take out Boba Fett, referencing to how the Hutts left Tatooine in the Book of Boba Fett and how Boba himself essentially became the powerhouse around these parts. Peli also compares Grogu to a Lurman, which is a sentient species from Magneto and first appeared in the Clone Wars. Mando asks Peli if she has a memory circuit needed to repair IG-11, however even the Jawas are hard-pressed to find such parts. Instead, Peli offers R5, who tells Mando that it is built for adventure, piloting starfighters, and fighting tyranny. Really a tongue-in-cheek reference to A New Hope where R5 almost replaced R2-D2 if it weren't for a bad motivator. Although some sources claim that he purposefully sabotaged himself so that he could be replaced by R2 after being told by R2 about the importance of the rebellion and his mission. So in some ways, R5 was already a hero to begin with. Peli tells Mando that she's willing to sell it for half the price and throw in an oil bath, which was first seen back in A New Hope. And with that, the crew head for the mines of Mandalore. On the approach, Mando talks about the planet and mentions the moon of Concordia, where he grew up. And Concordia has a long history with the extreme sects of Mandalorian society, at one point used by Death Watch as a secret base, and the moon was often home to exiled Mandalorians. We then learn that the fusion bombs used by the Empire disrupted the planet's magnetic field, essentially preventing any signals from traveling in or out of the planet, which also explains why so little news or information has come out regarding Mandalore since the Purge. Mando sends a reluctant R5 to scan the area, but soon has to chase after him after R5's signal drops off. Mando finds the ruined city of Sundari, the former capital of Mandalore, and he is then ambushed by the Alamites, creatures native to the planet. Mando pulls out the Darksaber, but it's pretty clear that he still hasn't gotten used to using it yet. As mentioned in the Book of Boba Fett, the reason why Mando is struggling is that he is constantly fighting against the blade, and much of this has to do with the fact that he hasn't quite come to terms with his new responsibility of becoming the leader of the Mandalorians. At this point and moment in time, Mando is still quite reluctant, and this hesitation to assume his new role is probably why he can't seem to get used to the blade. Mando finds R5, and we soon learn that contrary to what the armorer has said, Mandalore isn't cursed. In fact, the air is completely breathable. Grogu and Mando venture further into the ruins, and their gradual descent into the Undercity is very much reminiscent of a lot of KOTOR games, like the lower levels of Taris where you would find all sorts of monsters and forgotten things. However, as Mando and Grogu head further down, Mando finds an old Mandalorian helmet, likely a leftover from the Purge. But this turns out to be a trap, and as Mando is captured, you can actually see the point where he is sedated by the robotic creature. And the creature itself really reminded me of a deranged Maul when Savage first found him in the Clone Wars, a sort of half-man, half-machine monster. The monster brings Mando to his lair, and Grogu tries to free Mando using the Force, but it doesn't work. Mando tells him to find Bo-Katan, and Grogu Yoda jumps right out of there. Grogu lands on Kalevala and Bo-Katan realizes that something is wrong. They then head back to Mandalore on Bo-Katan's ship, a Mandalorian gauntlet, and the gauntlet was a very common starfighter used by the Mandalorians during the Clone Wars and prior to the Purge. As Grogu and Bo-Katan look over the destroyed city, Bo-Katan remarks that her family once ruled over it, probably referencing the fact that her sister, Duchess Satine Kryze, was once its pacifist ruler. Grogu gets a short lesson in courage, and as they venture deeper, Bo-Katan immediately senses an ambush from the Alamites, which contrasts with Mando's initial encounter with these hostiles. What is also apparent is how much more proficient Bo-Katan is as a warrior compared to Din Djarin. Also, pay attention to Bo-Katan's lasers, which are distinctively yellow. This color is much more in line with what the Mandalorians traditionally used, unlike most of the galaxy which used red lasers, so it's nice to see this small detail back in action. We then cut to Mando, who is still partially sedated, and the creature immediately begins pumping his blood, which is likely the monster's food source. Bo-Katan faces off with the creature and makes use of the Darksaber, and here is where the difference in swordsmanship between Mando and Bo-Katan becomes very clear. Unlike Din Djarin, who struggles to use it, Bo-Katan wields it without any issue. And it also goes to show that Bo-Katan could have tried to reclaim the sword from Mando at any given moment. Given how much better of a warrior Mando is, she could have easily challenged him to a duel and taken back the saber, which does beg the question as to why hasn't she done so. Bo-Katan defeats the monster with ease and Mando is saved. She feeds Mando some pog soup, which honestly sounds like a name concocted in the toxic depths of a Twitch chat, and we then learn that pog soup is apparently a staple of the Mandalorian diet, a point which Bo-Katan makes fun of Mando, who knows nothing about it. And much of this has to do with the fact that unlike Bo-Katan, Mando wasn't born and raised in Mandalore, and so while he is a Mandalorian by creed and tradition, he isn't quite familiar with the little things that native Mandalorians do. Mando insists on finding the mines of Mandalore, and Bo-Katan gives in and offers to lead the way. As Bo-Katan gives Mando a tour, she remarks that what made the Mandalorians weak was due to infighting and clan wars, which allowed them to be smashed by the fists of the Empire. And much of the infighting that Bo-Katan is referring to stems from the long-standing martial traditions of the Mandalorians. In fact, the demise of the Mandalorians throughout its history has mostly been caused by infighting between the various Mandalorian factions. Wars such as the Great Clan Wars, which effectively destroyed the native environment of Mandalore, which actually stands much more in line with what her sister was championing during the Clone Wars, a position that Bo-Katan fought against as a member of Death Watch. But I guess across many painful lessons in time, Bo-Katan's perspective has shifted to be more in line with her sister, although she is a far cry from being a pacifist. Another thing to note is that Bo-Katan describes the Mandalorians as being smashed by the fists of the Empire, which could be a reference to Vader's fist, which was the nickname given to the 501st Legion who fought under Lord Vader. So perhaps the 501st also took part in the Purge as well. As the trio entered the mines, Bo-Katan remarks about how she came here once as a child, but she dismisses the event as theater for the Mandalorian people. And much of Bo-Katan's dismissal of this event as mere theatrics reflects where her character is at this moment and plays into the central theme of this entire episode, specifically what makes a Mandalorian. And what is interesting is that Bo-Katan almost has a sort of apprehension towards any of the traditional Mandalorian customs or rituals, dismissing them as effectively nonsense and children's stories. But unlike Bo-Katan, Mando still hangs on to these elements of being a Mandalorian. He remains faithful to these traditions despite knowing that the magic isn't real, not because he is delusional, but because he understands that they are still an important part of being a Mandalorian. And so it's the commitment to the creed and traditions that has allowed for the Mandalorians to retain their identity as Mandalorians despite losing their home world, something which Bo-Katan seems to be struggling with ever since she lost the Darksaber. Regardless of whether you believe in the magic or mysticism, they are still important to the core ideas of being a Mandalorian. Bo-Katan also briefly talks about her father, Adonai Kryze, who apparently died defending Mandalore, and the dialogue makes it seem as though Bo's father died during the Purge, but he actually died a lot earlier than that, specifically during the Great Clan Wars. Mando acknowledges her father's sacrifice by saying,
"This is the way."
which seems to have some effect on Bo-Katan. And much of the later part of this episode is all about reminding Bo-Katan about the importance of her faith in the Mandalorian way. We then get a history from Bo-Katan as she recites the story of how the first Mandalore tamed the mythosaur, which became the signet of the Mandalorians, an age-old story that we are now more than familiar with. And while Bo-Katan regards much of this with apathy, it's a huge moment for Din as the living waters will now allow him to recommit to his faith. Din ends up sinking unexpectedly and Bo dives in to save him, but the real interesting things happen on the way up, as Bo-Katan encounters the beast of Mandalorian legend, the mythosaur itself. And this has huge ramifications moving forward, as the right to claim the Mandalorian throne will now be contingent not only on whoever holds the Darksaber, but potentially whoever can also tame the mythosaur, which is arguably a far older tradition than the Darksaber itself. It's also important to note that the latter half of the episode was just as important for Mando in redeeming himself as it is to Bo-Katan, who has now begun to reconnect with her faith in the Mandalorian way. Much of this episode was really about reminding Bo-Katan of her commitment to her people and to her faith, something which she lost alongside the Darksaber. And what's poetic about all of this is that alongside Mando, she too has bathed in the living waters, reconfirming her identity as a Mandalorian and reigniting her belief in the old stories. So that was the breakdown for episode 2 of season 3. What an episode! So let me know what you think in the comments down below. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. I am the Lost Acolyte,
and I have spoken.